Hey everyone! Last time I showed you my 2022 reading journal, which is this nude colored journal up top. So for a more detailed look, I'll link that video so you can see those spreads, as well as a flip through that's more detailed than this. Okay, and then so for this video in particular, I'm going to show you what is in my bright yellow journal. I use this journal in particular to keep track of all of my book reviews, so I'll open it up for you. So you can see here in the table of contents that I have 8 entries. And that's because that is the amount of books that I've read and reviewed this year so far. It's really nice to have a built-in table of contents in pre-numbered pages within a notebook, so details on this notebook and the stationery used will be included down below. So let's turn to the next page. So now on this page, I have my January title page, which includes a bookshelf of all the books I've read so far. I really like how this combination of peach, yellow, and blue has come together. I think that the blue pops in such a beautiful way. I like to have a staggered bookshelf because it looks really interesting. The trick is fitting in the book title into the spine so that it is not too cluttered and easily readable. I personally don't think that I've done all that well here, so that is definitely an area to improve going forward. So zooming out, I had fun decorating this page full of dots and brown flowers. The inspiration for this Hello January spread is from Canva. I've just added my bookshelf into the mix. So in the bottom right, I added some origami paper and I keep it in place with my gold washi tape. So let's flip the page to see our first book review. So please note that each of these spreads may reveal some information that's pertaining to the different books that are shown. So there's your disclaimer before diving in. I'd like to go over how I journal my book notes and an overview of these spreads. I try to keep each page consistent, but sometimes that is really challenging to do. So first, what I do, I write the title and try to make it pop. I include some information such as the date I finished the book, the author, when the book was published, and also the amount of pages of each book. And at the top left, I do a very simple illustration of the book cover. Then I write a short blurb for the author and add in various main points that I'd like to remember. So this includes the novel's main characters, how the book made me feel, content warnings, and whether or not I would recommend the book. So my layout here is done in a similar way as the Cornell method, with titles on the left and then notes on the right. So I find that it makes it really easy to go back to and review my notes, and I did this method a fair amount during my grad studies. So the left of the page you can see is pretty well structured, but on the right page I write down my thoughts. And I allow myself to write my thoughts on the novel freely. So this may include a book review, novel quotes, and main points of the book. It may also include a plot timeline and any supplementary research that I've done surrounding the book. So this spread in particular was a lot of fun, and I pulled from the book cover, which had a lot of yellow on the book cover, and I added stars and musical elements since this book is about Enchanted, a teenager who is trying to make it in the music industry. So now let's see the next spread. So this spread is for an audiobook that I listened to called The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. So I finished this book on January 7th of 2021, and the book was published in 1963. It is 128 pages long. So the spread is also inspired by the cover and the title of the book, and so I used orange and black and yellow and a gray color palette. So here on my thoughts page, I included a quote by James Baldwin, and I also wanted to remember that this book is told in 2 separate essays. So the first essay is on race in America, and the second is focused on race and religion from the author's perspective. So let's see the next page. So this is a simple spread of one of my favorite books of the year so far. I gave it 5 stars, and it's called Letter to My Daughter by Maya Angelou. So I listened to the audiobook and I really love the content of the book. However, what makes the book so amazing was listening to Maya Angelou. So I wrote very few notes at all because I was just so enchanted by her voice. It was really fun to use like pinks and blues and yellow on the spread, and I wanted to include these envelopes on the right side of the page, on the thoughts page, one each for self-love, for healing and acceptance, which I think really complements the themes of the book. And while there are so many quotable moments, this quote really stood out to me. A friend may be waiting behind a stranger's face. So here's a closer look of that quote. So on this next page is one of my favorite spreads of the entire journal. So I just love so many elements of the spread. So you can see here on the top left that the book cover has a very simple illustration of the ghost of Canterville. I really wanted to doodle a spooky looking guy, and okay, so let's just focus on the plot timeline. I don't always include a plot timeline, but I like to include it if I think that I will forget elements of the book, which happens more often than I really care to admit. So luckily this was a short story and the plot timeline was fairly simple, but the timelines can be vast and extensive, in which case I would use multiple pages. It was fun to think of a visually interesting color palette, so I used purple, peach, yellow, gray, and green, and somehow I think it works pretty well. The house was a lot of fun to draw. And again, this illustration in particular was inspired by a house, a haunted house visual element I spotted on Canva. So, on to the next page. Alright, so this page is dedicated to a short story book which is called Islands of Decolonial Love by Leanne Simpson. I was inspired to use these colors in particular and draw these elements because the more I read, the more I could visualize the author's intentions, which is finding hope and love amidst trauma and colonialism within the Indigenous community. Therefore, I try to use a beautiful design with a little bit of gray thrown in there as well. So my thoughts page here is focused on understanding the author's intention, as well as some information regarding the Anishinaabe people and language, Anishinaabe-Moan. And so my final review is on the bottom of the page. I know I'll do a wrap-up or hope to do a wrap-up at the end of the month, but I did give this a 4.25 stars. It was great and I recommend it for a wealth of knowledge and understanding. Okay, so my next spread is on a book by Thomas King, which is called 77 Fragments of a Familiar Ruin. So I read it as an ebook, and it was made of 77 fragmented poems which come together to discuss various topics within the book. So I chose to add in these little fragments at the corners in blue, yellow, and gray, just like the book cover's color palette. And on my thought page, there are 2 quotables, and I like to add quotes in with little quotation marks so that they stand out on the page. And my review is at the very bottom of my thoughts page. Okay, so the next spread is on a book called Bearcoon. Actually, the full title is Bearcoon, The Story of the Last Black Cargo by Zora Neale Hurston. So it's a biographical account of Cudjoe Lewis, or Kazula. So Kazula was the last person enslaved and brought over to America on a ship called the Clotilda. And he was brought over illegally in 1860 to 1861. The book was not published until 2018, and it highlights an interview of Kazula and Zora Neale Hurston that took place in the late 1920s. So this spread in particular was very much inspired by the book cover artwork. So I used yellows, oranges, greens. My thought page really detailed a summary of Kazula and the events that took place from being born in West Africa to surviving his capture during the Atlantic slave trade. So it was a very remarkable book that was supplemented by a lot of history surrounding the interview and publication in particular. All right, so let's move on to the next page. All right, so this page has a special golden tag that you can see here. That's because it was for an advanced reader copy I was provided by NetGalley. So shout out to the author and publisher for allowing me to read and review this book, as well as NetGalley. So it's dedicated to a cozy mystery which is called Cold Brew Corpse, a coffee lover's mystery number 2 by author Tara Lush. Okay, now this was a lot of fun to doodle because the book took place on a Florida beach, so I drew in some yellow palm trees. The protagonist is Lana Lewis, who owns a coffee shop. So I added in a cup of cold brew on the bottom right corner of the spread, and I took my notes after finishing the book. Well, actually, most of the time I write my review spreads after finishing the book, and on that page I just detailed my book review. So for those interested in this book, it was a good cozy mystery, and I gave it 3.75 stars on the story graph and rounded it up to 4 on Goodreads. So those are all of my general book reviews. So now let's go to my book club spread, which is a little bit more detailed. And I love the spread so much. It's for Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, which was published in 2018. So for those who are interested in this book, we are reading it this month for the Top Shelf Society Book Club, so there will be info in the description box, but be warned that there are detailed plot notes on my thoughts page, which I will be discussing in a general sense. So now with that in mind, I will show you my spread. So I focused on elements of the book cover, and in particular, I loved a few things. I love the illustrated transformation from silver to gold. And I really love the blue crystals. So you can see these crystals here on the book cover and sprinkled throughout my spread. Because I loved how the blue highlight and pen look together, I decided to keep this element on my plot timeline and just think it looks so cool. So now, because there are a lot of points to keep track of, there are a lot of plot timeline boxes, many more than there were for the Canterville Ghost spread. But you can see here this book is much longer, so it is 480 pages. It's a fantasy book, and there are lots of things that happen in the story. So in fact, I haven't finished the book and still plan on using more pages. So what's nice about making my book club spreads so detailed is that I tend to remember more information for my book club meetings, which take place at the end of the month. And honestly, I like to read my book club books well in advance so that I ensure that I finish them. So happy with how this spread is turning out, and I can't wait to read more of the book and add more pages to the spread. Now, I'd like to give an example of how I tab my books. I don't use the tabbing method for every book, however, I try to do it for my book club books and any books that I review and dedicate a reading vlog for. So if you have any requests for books that you'd like to see a reading vlog for, please leave it down below and I'll look into those books. So as an example, I'd like to show you my book, which is called Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Bowley, which was a summer Top Shelf Society book club book. And it was one of my favorite books of the year. I used my 3-color tabbing system: green tabs for new vocabulary, orange tabs for facts and for learning, and red or pink for emotional points. And I do put in large orange stars just for major plot points that I find. So when I write my reviews, I wait until I read the entire book and will look back at the tabs and jot down anything of interest that I'd like to retain for my review. I only do this for some books, and because there was such a wealth of information that I gained from this book, there are a lot of tabs. Also with tabbing, you can refer in your notes back to the page where you found that information and add it into your review or reference it in footnotes if you'd like to be very detailed. All right, everyone. So that is an introduction to my yellow reading journal, which is dedicated to book notes and review. I may do a mid-year flip through to show you how the journal progresses throughout the year, but I will leave you now with a final flip through of the journal. Happy reading!